Chancellor Telfer, honored guests, distinguished faculty members, and dear graduates. I have 3 academic degrees, but I have never attended any of my own commencements. So I do not have an intimate sense how a student may feel on this happiest of occasions. And so I hope you'll forgive me any missteps. For my PhD, my advisor would have had to walk in the procession with me, and he was in poor health, and I decided not to impose on him. For my first year's teaching, schedule and low pay at UWM prevented me from traveling to Indiana to get my MA. And I could not scrape together the $15 for renting the gown for my BA. So, on an overcast Saturday morning a week later, a secretary in his deserted registrar's office at Indiana University struggled to pin this epaulet saying, "Highest honors," on the shoulder of my sleeveless blouse, shook my hand, said congratulations, and that was it. I've never worn this in public, but here my chance has come at last. Which leads me naturally to the first of my 3 points. It is not too late. If you try to do something and it doesn't quite work, you can always do it a second time, or you can always do it later. My mother, Agate Nesaule, had a very privileged childhood with governesses and ballet lessons and servants pulling off her boots, so that when she arrived at her private school at age 10, she did not know how to tie her shoes. This way of life was destroyed by the Russian Revolution, World War I, and the death of her father. Although she was as smart as her brothers, it was a given in the 1920s that education for girls was not as important as for boys. Her dream had been to go to the University of Latvia, but instead she had to attend the Teachers Institute and get a job so that she could help her 2 brothers get their degrees in medicine and theology. War disrupted her life a second time. She had to leave her comfortable home, her possessions, and her country in 1944. After 5 years in displaced persons camps in Germany, she came to the United States. She did hard and humiliating work, handling burning hot tomatoes at the Stokely's cannery and washing dishes at LaRue's Supper Club. Well past midnight, she walked home alone through the dangerous neighborhood where we lived. She taught herself English by reading newspapers, listening to the radio, talking to her co-workers, who included the now famous jazz composer David Baker, and by taking courses at Indiana University. Amazing people are probably washing dishes and cleaning toilets somewhere right now, too. In the 1950s, students of non-traditional age were very rare, and she was regarded with suspicion and even derision by some students and some faculty. She graduated as a Phi Beta Kappa, received her PhD in comparative literature in 1975, a much more difficult degree to achieve than my PhD in English, and I thought mine was hard enough. It was more than 20 years after she started her first course, and she was 70 years old. You are graduating in a time of economic hardship and political upheaval, but do not lose hope. If your first job is not exactly what you want and deserve, if the one you're in love with marries someone else, if your application for a mortgage is turned down because of your student loans, with persistence and patience, you will achieve what you want. It is not too late. There is a second chance and more chances than that. The second idea I want to leave with you is that reading and books open doors to the world. I lost my childhood paradise, a parsonage in Latvia, and experienced war firsthand in Germany. I was 7 years old. In a camp circled by barbed wire, I saw Nazi soldiers beat other inmates. Later, Russian soldiers shoved women and young girls onto muddy floors and raped them. They forced us to watch as they executed the Lutheran minister who had protected us. They marched us to the very same spot the next day to show us the corpse of Heidi, the little girl who sat next to me in school, and her mother. They dragged away first my father, then my mother, and left me and my 8-year-old sister alone without any protection. I came to the United States at age 12. I suffered from nightmares, blushed and trembled, and assumed disaster would follow my smallest mistake. I was ashamed that I was alive, and I felt guilty about those who had died, about Anne Frank especially. In the 1950s, concepts like post-traumatic stress were not in use, and counseling or special services for newly arrived immigrants did not exist. On top of all that, I had long braids, strange clothes, and worst of all, I did not know any English. It was June, I was in Indianapolis, and I was terrified of school starting in September. From previous experience in Germany, I expected that the teachers would punish me for not knowing how to answer questions, and that the other children would beat me because I was a foreigner and different. As millions have done with traumatic events before me, as many of you have done also, I compartmentalized. I tried to put aside what I could not change and to concentrate on what I could, which was to learn English. A Latvian woman who had been here for 3 months and was therefore considered an expert on America took me to the public library, one of the great and effective American institutions. She knew little English, but mostly she pointed to words in her dictionary and waved about her arms. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. "Oh," the librarian said, and returned with Gone with the Wind. In the displaced persons camps in the British zone, we had inadequate food, but we did get American cigarettes. My parents, non-smokers both, and my grandmother received packs of Lucky Strikes and Camels, which we exchanged for food and a few other necessities. Other necessities included books. My parents had acquired a Latvian English dictionary, but only the first half of Gone with the Wind, which had been translated into Latvian and published in 4 separate small booklets. There's nothing like Gone with the Wind for a 12-year-old girl. I began comparing sentences in English and Latvian and looking up almost every word in the dictionary. I know now that Gone with the Wind is full of racism and sexism and other flaws, but I was enthralled. Love, romance, Scarlett O'Hara, Ashley Wilkes, Rhett Butler. Gone with the Wind is also about war and the aftermath of war, and that part of the story drew me too. By the time I had worked my way through the novel, I could read English, though it took me some months longer to work up the courage to speak it. I was on my way to more books, more education, teaching English literature to American students, and finally to writing books myself. So I hope that you too continue to value books and reading. Essential public institutions like libraries and schools are currently under attack by misinformation and underfunding. But you can support them by your votes, your voices on the internet and elsewhere, volunteer work, and donations, no matter how small. My third and final hope is that you keep open your heart. When I look back at wartime horrors, the least dramatic, but by far the most damaging, was starvation. When Russian soldiers occupied the institution where we were sheltering, they smashed hundreds of jars of preserved fruit, vegetables, and meat. They dumped barrels of flour and sugar on the floor, and they defecated and urinated over everything. They would have starved themselves, but they could mine lakes for fish and seize a few cows the farmers had kept hidden. We, on the other hand, ate the carrots and potatoes overlooked in the ground the fall before, the leaves of linden trees, and the thin red skin of rose hips. We watched as soldiers spilled precious milk on the ground. My mother taught me some children's verses in Russian, pinned a small wreath of flowers on my head, and pushed me towards the soldiers. I had to control my trembling, keep my voice steady, recite, and beg. There's something inexpressibly damaging about starvation, even more so than violence. To see that others are eating and to be shown that you are not worth feeding yourself damages the soul. Millions are desperately poor and starving today in this country and elsewhere. Thousands of soldiers are returning from wars with physical and with psychological wounds, which are harder to admit to and to treat. Such massive suffering is impossible to take in or try to alleviate. I'm overwhelmed by despair when I see fly-tormented, skeletal, emaciated children, and I often turn off the TV. But even the smallest action counts. As I wrote in A Woman in Amber, even the briefest human connection can heal. We have to believe that that matters. Otherwise, life is unbearable. So voting for someone who will work for peace, mentoring a floundering colleague, volunteering in a community center, spending a little time with that boring aunt or disgraced teenager at the family gathering, all of it adds to the goodness in the world. These three ideas, it is not too late, love of reading and books, and keeping an open heart are, of course, related and nourish each other in countless ways. Just as one example, if you continue to read, you will know what to do when the second chance comes. You will understand others and the world better, and you will be more compassionate. No act of kindness, however small, is ever wasted, said Aesop in the 6th century BC. My religion is kindness, said the Dalai Lama in the 20th. If you want to be happy, practice. If you want others to be happy, practice kindness. If you want to be happy yourself, practice kindness. The Dalai Lama added more practically in the 21st century. So, armed with persistence and patience, with the love of books and with compassion, you can and you will change the world. I wish you every success as you go forward. Congratulations, and thank you.